Here we are with Crimean War, 4 battles, an SPI quadra game. Bunch of names I don't recognize as designers, and Stephen Ross as developer. Again, he's one of the designers. Somewhere of this. Yeah. So Ross designed the system. What we're going to find is significant changes made in the, at least in this battle, the Alma battle, which kind of feel like the designer of this battle didn't really like the standard rules. We'll take a look at that in a bit. My history on this sucker. This is one of those quads that I really wanted to get a hold of. I don't know how long ago I picked it up, probably, well, certainly before like 2015. And it's been booting around. The one that I wanted to get maybe a little more than this was the Great War in the East quad. But then, I don't know, I never got a hold of it. I wanted to look at things other than Tannenberg, how they would be handled in that. I have a couple other games on this period. I don't think I have anything in the magazine games, but I have this Decision Games one, covers Inkerman among others, and then I have a 3W Alma. I don't have a great deal. Oh, there's another one that I want to do. Another SPI I want to do. I don't have a great deal of hope for either of those. They were things I picked up when I was still wanting to get this, and then I got this. So, what I found is kind of interesting about it. This is a design that's meant to capitalize on some of the innovations that things like Terrible Swift Sword over there, and he actually credits that in Wellington's victory, have added to wargaming. This was made in '78. Trying to incorporate firepower into what was the more traditional, like the Blue and Gray series. It's kind of interesting because the designer puts forward that, and the Napoleonic War stuff, that the designer puts forward that those games aren't particularly historically accurate. And then goes forward with, but the results tend to be. And, that's kind of it feels to me like he's grasping for that. They're not as historically detailed. But it's not. I'm not so sure, because the mechanisms you had to use to fight battles under those systems, the surrounding and stuff like that often had to be used, aren't terribly. I mean, yes, if you could manage that, that was great. But that wasn't how units fell apart always. So this is going to give an interesting kind of feel to it. We'll see. It's got some neat facets to it. There's a fair amount of errata, and I'm going to have to work it in. I haven't actually read the errata. I have read the standard rules and the exclusive rules to Alma. So the first thing is we have 3 values at the bottom of the unit, and that's fire strength, melee strength, and then a morale rating. Okay. So like TSS, movement points generally are going to be based on the type of unit, which in the general case is infantry have 5, cav have 8, and artillery and horse artillery have 7. Find regular artillery. Regular artillery is specified in the game rules. However, in Alma, this is one of those places where the designer of this specific game decided to go against the base. Movement allowances are all printed on the counters in this extra position, and I think that's a good idea. Honestly, I think it would have been better to have firepower, melee, movement allowance, and morale up in that top position, because morale is a new factor to it. And I wish they had done that throughout the whole system. I had a bit of trouble setting this sucker up. I don't know, I bought it used. It was already punched, and I don't know how the units were sorted. By the time I got to it, they were sorted by nationality, which is not particularly useful. I think that you use a different counter mix for each battle, because these were sold as individual folios as well. So you had 100 counters per sheet in the folio game, and then some, 400 counter sheet for the for the quad. But not only did I have to try to figure out using this listing, or there are some printings here on the board a la Brighton Field. I'm looking here, did they get... So there are a couple of units that are not in the setup. Yeah, there are 2 Russian units, setup hexes missing from the map. They're correctly listed over here, that's great. Okay. Which helped throw me into some difficulty. And in particular, everything is listed by its unit designation, which I have had a lot of trouble reading. And given that everything was sorted by nationality, that really doesn't work. Anyway, let's start buzzing into the rolls. We'll see what we're going to look at. 5.25. Okay. We have a bunch of different types of terrain here. Looks a lot like TSS, except without the hilltop hexes. You got a town. The town in Alma is this one. The Russians have set it on fire, so it's not going to be usable in it. A couple of different types of roads. The setup hexes. Differentiated between steep and gentle slopes. There's a redoubt. There's a major river going through the Alma. It says stream also. Yes, it counts as a stream to the west. The banks of the Alma are particularly problematic, and we'll get to that. Oh, there's another town over here. Okay. Anyway, let's not worry too much about the individual map. I just wanted to get it set up before I start. Yeah, standard NATO symbols on things. My hair's itchy because I haven't had my bath yet. I haven't had to take a dump, and it's Saturday. Well, it's actually Sunday morning now. After I've slept through and fiddled around on the computer for most of the day. Sequence of play. Okay, that's a good place to go. This is a I go, you go type game. Each player first gets a movement phase, then there's a defensive fire phase, much like TSS, an offensive fire phase, followed by a melee phase, followed by a rally phase, and then you go into the next player turn, which is a mirror. Movement itself, stacking and zones of control are going to be the major factor here. the terrain effects. In the back of here. There we go. Terrain effects are here. Alma has vineyards, which are the woods-looking things. They're particularly expensive to move in. It also, Inkerman has swamps. The major roads cost you less to follow. Minor roads, you can follow them, and they might reduce movement point costs for things. The slopes, you're going to pay extra to move from one slope hex to another, and that's reflected here, whereas these are crossing the slope. Ridges are when two slopes meet each other. I guess this is one with a steep and a gentle on it. I'm looking to see if there's one. And they have particular differences of costs based on how they're made up. I don't see any cliff here, so I'm not going to worry about it. Redoubt is going to have a restriction for artillery and cavalry. They're not able to move through them unless there's a road going through them, which there is not in this game. That's okay, there's no cav in this scenario either. The cav's off board. And the argument in Alma is that had either side been able to devote their cav to it, it would have been a very different battle. Especially the Russians, who had a huge cavalry contingent. Let's see. I don't think we have an aqueduct. And these are specifics there. Okay. And movement is more or less as you're expecting if you're used to hex war games. So I'm going to assume, even though you might be a beginning player coming to this. Look, I've gone over the basics of this. I remember at the Napoleon's Art of War game set. Okay. Stacking. You can move through friendly units, but you basically can't stack with one exception, artillery. Artillery can stack with one another, or, well, essentially an artillery unit can stack with one other unit. It could be an artillery, it could be an infantry, it could be a cav. Zones of control. The 6 hexes surrounding are generally going to be zones of control. If your unit is disrupted, which is the back side of the unit, and unlike blue and gray, it's not just a mess. It actually has values on it. Facing's not going to matter, by the way. Both players can exert a zone into a single hex. They don't go across non-bridged rivers or cliff hex sides. The zones are going to require melee combat, but disrupted units will not be required to melee, although they're allowed to. When you enter an enemy zone, you have to stop movement. You can only leave an enemy zone by going into an empty space, one that's not in an enemy zone. Fire combat. So the fire combat happens in the defensive and offensive fire phases. You trace a line of sight, and during the offensive, you can fire at any unit to which you can trace. Yeah, it's the same in both. All units have a fire combat strength, or that have a fire combat strength, may participate in combat. However, units whose fire strengths are parenthesized can only fire in the defensive fire phase, and we have some of those. Some of the Russian units have a parenthesized fire combat. There's no limit to the number of units you can direct fire from. There are going to be modifications to this in Alma. Oh, what have we missed so far? This has a correction to it. I'm going to have to pencil it. Where are we here? You saw only top unit in a stack can fire or be fired upon. You're only attacked once in any given fire phase, but as many units as can shoot at it may. You have to trace a line of sight. You can fire through other units, friendly or enemy. Probably indicating that the hexes are a lot bigger than the formations that are in them. Fire combat. I don't know what the range is. That's what I'm looking for here. And I need to switch batteries, unfortunately. I feel pretty crappy until I take my bath. It seems kind of weird, but because, I don't know, somehow that revitalizes me. Where are we here? Infantry can only fire at units that are adjacent to them. There's the range. Artillery can fire several hexes away, depending on the range of the gun used by that artillery unit. In this case, it's going to be based on the class, but there's only going to be one class of gun. The class of artillery is written on the counters. Line of sight. If the firing unit is firing across a steep slope or cliff hex side from the uphill side, fuck. I'm so shitty I can't even keep my pipe in my mouth. If the firing unit is firing across a steep slope or cliff from the uphill side and the distance to that cliff or steep slope hex side is greater than half the distance to the target from the firing unit's hex, counting the hex sides, then the line of sight is blocked. Basically, the idea here is if you're far enough back on the uphill side, you can be blocked by the slope. And this is going to be handled, it's reciprocal. As line of sight damn well better be. Although I think there's a case where it might not work that way. Whenever line of sight passes first through an up slope and then through a down slope, it's blocked regardless of whether the slopes are steep or gentle. I think there were other things that block here, like woods. No villages do. Ridges always block line of sight except when they form a side of the firing unit's hex. Yeah, this is the thing that bugs me. If I'm behind a ridge, I can see you, but you can't see me. I don't really like that. I prefer to see some kind of defensive benefit for the ridge under those circumstances. But woods and towns always block line of sight. You don't have to worry about elevation levels in this system. If line of sight is congruent to a hex side, it is blocked only if both hexes are blocking terrain. The terrain in the target hex and in the hex of the firing unit does not block line of sight. That sounds like it might cover this, but that's hex side, so it's different. Other units, enemy or friendly, do not block line of sight. Units can always fire at enemy units that are adjacent to them, regardless of the terrain. The fire combat table, in general, is over here. It's repeated over here and might be different, and this is where there's some replacements. But basically, the sum is going to give you a number. What happens with that number? Interestingly, it's here. Okay. If you get a numbered result, if that's equal to or greater than the target's morale rating, that target is disrupted. If the target was already disrupted and it takes a value equal to its morale rating, then the target unit retreats a hex. If it's greater than the morale rating, the target unit is eliminated. An undisrupted unit whose morale rating is less than the result on the table must retreat a number of hexes equal to the difference between the result and their morale rating. Yes. Yeah. You're getting a higher rating. This is in addition to suffering the disruption. And if you're not able to retreat, you'll be eliminated. Okay. Melee combat. All undisrupted units with unparenthesized melee that begin the phase in an enemy zone of control must melee those enemy units exerting zones on them. Now remember, disrupted units don't have zones, so you wouldn't have to attack them. The attacker totals melee strength units. I believe you're allowed to melee things. So this is going to be one of those games where you have to melee every unit that is exerting a zone on any of your units. And you can do soak-off attacks and stuff like that. And that will work. It's obviously adjacent. You look up a terrain type. This is similar to Wellington's victory, honestly, to build the chart like this. It's essentially a column shift. I don't know which I find easier to deal with. Swamp is a special case. Crap in my glasses. Which is easier to attack somebody who's in a swamp. But if you're in a swamp attacking someone in a swamp, you actually use the clear terrain side of things. If you get the attacker's morale affects how well they melee. The higher their morale, the better. If you get a bold result, it applies to the attacker. And the results are going to be a retreat of that number of hexes, along with a disruption, or no disruption. If you get an R result, you just retreat one hex without disrupting. An asterisk, cavalry or already disrupted units will be eliminated by getting that result on them. And then E's are eliminations. You're going to see a lot of pushing in this game, similar to many other SPI games, as opposed to eliminations all over the place. You've got rules, so because of the stacking limitations, you might find that your own units are blocking your retreats or whatnot. You can displace your units, but it is the originally retreating unit that pays the price and is destroyed if you can't create a no loss retreat. When the defender is forced to retreat or is eliminated, they leave a path of hexes that the attacker may advance along. They have to follow it precisely. The attacker's morale affects his die roll, essentially. It's just structured differently, but if several units have different morale ratings, the highest morale rating in the attack determines how well they do. The defender's rating only affects the number of hexes to be retreated due to melee. Why is that? Units with a morale rating of 1, add 1 to the hexes they have to retreat. Units with a morale rating of 5, subtract 1. Now, these combat charts had some modifications to them, if I recall correctly. Fire combat table. We got some shifts here. The defending unit is Cav. Causes a shift to the right. That's on here. The defending unit is disrupted. The defending unit is an artillery unit that could not fire in the player turn. The only thing they seem to do is change the numbering on this. I'm not sure why. Okay, we've got a addition of artillery elevation. This is going back to fire combat again. The field artillery in the Crimean War was direct fire. This caused a problem when firing over redoubts. Artillery in a redoubt does not have this problem, as the redoubt had firing ports. An artillery unit in the splash hex of a redoubt hex side and firing through that redoubt may fire only into the adjacent hex. That's probably what they want to do anyway. An artillery unit firing through a redoubt hex side from the non-splash hex direction is not affected. Clarifications there. The back is the disrupted state. There are also some counters. Players experience difficulty. Yes. Okay. You can tell front and back easy enough. They're just giving some suggestions about that. Okay. That's the end of the errata. Where are we? Effects of disruption. It's flipped over. This is going to have their movement allowance, which we do not see on here. We see different reduction. Disrupted artillery and horse artillery cannot be moved. If forced to do so, they're eliminated. You either move or fire with artillery. Disrupted artillery, disrupted units don't have zones of control or affect the movement of enemy units through adjacent hexes. They don't get movement bonuses on roads. They are not required to attack adjacent units. They do not force an attack against them. If they do attack, they follow normal melee combat. If a disrupted unit stacked with an undisrupted unit is attacked, the disrupted unit must add its melee strength to the total strength of the hex. Disrupted artillery and horse artillery cannot participate in fire combat. When firing at a disrupted unit, you get a column shift that we looked at. During the rally phase, you can attempt to rally your disrupted units. For each disrupted unit, you roll a die. If you get equal to or less than the unit's morale rating, the unit is considered rallied and is flipped back over. If a disrupted unit is adjacent to an undisrupted unit, it's a bonus. If it's... If it's adjacent to an undisrupted enemy unit, it gets a penalty. An undisrupted friendly unit, it gets a bonus. If it's in a redoubt, it gets a bonus. Cavalry. This one's scary. Okay. Cav has a movement allowance of 8. Infantry has a movement allowance of 6 in the core game. Whenever a Cav unit expends 7 or more movement points, it's disrupted. I guess useful for running away, maybe, kinda, sorta. A Cav unit that is moved into a woods hex. Oh, I'm sorry. Infantry has a movement allowance of 5. Yeah. So Cav can move a little bit faster, but in general, they're not going to be particularly fast. And especially, and most notably, they can't charge at a high speed because they will be disrupted, and that's bad. A Cav unit that's moved into a woods hex through a non-road hex side is disrupted. If forced to enter as a result of combat, it's eliminated. Cav units may not cross redoubt hex sides without a road running through them. When a Cav unit engages in melee combat, it becomes disrupted. This takes place immediately after the combat's been resolved. The disruption occurs regardless of the results or whether the Cav was attacking or defending. This is not going to be cumulative. If they get a disruption in combat, they're not eliminated because of that. If it's unable to retreat, however, it will be eliminated. If a combat result affecting Cav included an asterisk, that Cav unit is eliminated, though. And there's quite a few of those. Yeah. Whenever a disrupted Cav unit engages in melee, it is eliminated. The elimination takes place after the combat's been resolved. Doesn't matter whether you win or lose. The non-phasing player may retreat his Cav units 1 hex during defensive fire. This is done after the defensive fire attacks have been resolved. Only those Cav units in the zone of control of a non-cavalry enemy unit may retreat. In addition, they may never be retreated into an enemy zone of control. So this is their saving grace, is they can fire and fall back. Reinforcements, if I recall, they extend off the board, and you pay movement for them there. There's some special cases for all that. Anyway, you can see the similarities to the sort of Napoleon's Art of War or Blue and Gray or whatever type of combat system, where you have to push units around a bit, you have to disrupt them, and then maybe you can kill them. It doesn't seem all that different from that. But with the addition of the firepower rating, you're going to have a capability to, like, change the odds a little bit and stuff like that. We'll see how it works. I got 4 of these game turn markers, which is good. I don't know which one came with which. I could look at the counter scans and see. And I'll go over the specifics for Alma itself in a little bit, but I want to get the core rules up there. It's nothing too shocking, but there are some ideas that I haven't seen before. You know, this sort of the firepower in conjunction with that, you know, sort of classic SPI melee, well, combat CRT type action does add a little bit of detail to the game. Again, I'm not sure how much it's going to make it more realistic. Send it up.